Hot singles are coming to an area near you.
You mean the spider?
Yes, I mean the Spider-Man set.
It's almost here, folks. So comment below with your favorite card from Universes Beyond Spider-Man as we wrap up the season finale for Edge of Eternities Standard. Folks, this upcoming weekend marks the end for Edge of Eternities Standard. It'll be the pre-release weekend for Universes Beyond Spider-Man, and as such, this is the week we'll be wrapping up our metagame analysis on the current standard meta. So without further ado, let's get into it. This week, we took a look at 10 tournaments, giving us 80 top 8 slots to choose from. Ending the season in first place once more, we have King Cauldron, amassing an impressive 26 top 8s and 7 trophies, giving this deck a 33% meta share to end the season. Now, this marks a slight uptick from week 6, where the deck had a 28% meta share, but that doesn't really tell the full tale. 7 out of 10 trophies is a massive uptick from last week, where the deck only had 3 trophies out of 13. So why does this matter? It means that not only are these strong pilots able to notch top 8s with this deck, they're converting those top 8s into wins at a hefty clip, which means this list is blowing by competitors that are teched for it. But more on that in a minute. King Cauldron starts this season with 23% of the winner's meta share, and it ends at 33%. I mean, we call that dominant.
Mono Red Aggro fell off at the end of the season, dropping from a week 6 season high of 28% down to 24%, in no small part due to the high levels of hate aimed at the Get 'em Dead Red strategy. Nonetheless, it still managed to grab 19 top 8 spots and a single trophy, which leaves it in Tier 1 as we look to add new cards from Universes Beyond next week. The story of Mono Red this season was one of explosive growth, going from 2% in week 1 all the way to 24% to end the season.
Dimir continued to hold steady this week, going from a 17% meta share in week 6 down to a 16% meta share to end the season. 13 top 8s and 2 trophies were enough to keep Curious Kaido in play once more. While we're still a ways off of the looming November Vivi ban, remember that this deck is likely to be public enemy number 1 once they make that chop. Dimir was the biggest loser this season, going from a week 1 meta share of 26% and ending the season at 16%, ostensibly handing that over to Cauldron or Red.
Azorius Control rounds out our Tier 1 contenders, making the leap from a 4% meta share in week 6 up to a 9% meta share as the season ends. This is an archetype that benefited heavily from Cauldron players all shifting to address Mono Red this past week, so don't expect this bump to last if Cauldron shifts back in the other direction. But in the meantime, you certainly can beat the crap out of Mono Red and Cauldron if you build it correctly. Note that Azorius started the season as only 2% of the meta, but finished at 9%, suggesting that there's room for improvement as Control routinely gains momentum the deeper a format gets.
Kicking off Tier 2, we have Selesnya Aggro, the latest Ouroboros variant to hit the scene with a whopping 2 top 8s and 0 trophies. Folks, this really highlights just how strong the top decks in this format have been all season. The Tier 2 deck shuffled routinely all season long with the latest experiment in trying to beat Cauldron while not losing too many points to Red and Dimir, but so far none have stuck the landing.
Sliding into 6th place is Simic Kona, thanks to the hard work and dedication of one MTGO grinder, helping snag a couple top 8s, though no trophies. Kona has morphed into the latest Omni combo archetype, though we've all seen the builds with Balgavoth and Vaultborn Tyrant. Look to see this archetype evolve as new sets come in, because there's enough power in a show and tell remix for this to have serious potential down the road.
7th place goes to good old Orzhov Pixies with 2 top 8s and 0 trophies as well. Pixies found itself in that awkward position of being fantastically positioned against Mono Red, being a step too slow against Control, and having a strong Cauldron matchup depending on how hard Cauldron hedged for it. Now, we started the season with Esper Pixies snagging 11% of the meta, but that swiftly gave way to Cauldron and then to remixing Esper into Orzhov as we sought to combat the tide of aggro once more. Expect Esper Pixies back in November once Vivi gets banned, though. It's only dead and buried until Vivi gets the chop.
Rounding out Tier 2 is Boros Mice, back once more with 2 top 8s and no trophies. Boros Mice had a rough season, starting at 3% of the meta, then disappearing until week 4, when it suddenly popped back up with a trophy and 6% of the meta, before disappearing again and only popping up as 3% here at the end. This list looks to be the strongest when going against Mono Red, as you play a similar strategy, but your list has built-in 2-for-1s and life gain. But time will tell where the meta sticks once Spidey and friends join the multiverse.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I'll be covering Boros Tokens, an archetype which looks to be a nightmare matchup for Control pilots, and of course Jeskai Synthesizers.
And I'll be highlighting Mono White Angels and Golgari Roots. Now click that button and let's warp on over to our archetype breakdowns, starting with King Cauldron once more.
Canister won the 156-player MTGO Showcase Challenge with Izzet Cauldron, smashing through mono red in the finals to cement a historic run by the best deck in Standard since Cutter. Now let's take a look. Well, Stormchaser's Talon is back, baby, and it's a lot scarier in a deck that readily scales and abuses the extra mana sinks. Quantum Riddler is also taking over where Steam Core Scholar left off, and we're seeing that uptick with 3 Riddlers and only 2 Scholars there in the main. I mean, everyone's ready to kill creatures with 5 toughness or less. Riddler has 6. It's also somewhere between a 2-for-1 and a 4-for-1, depending on how it goes. And it encourages you to go ahead and play that hand out quickly without a real downside. So it's so well positioned. Having the Harmonized mechanic go into it with Winternight Stories too is just insane. And right now we're also seeing a really balanced take here on the removal suite with a 3/3/2 look at Into, Torch, and Abrade. That last slot going to Wild Ride is also spicy, given that with Vivi, it is +4 mana. Like, it's just got enough potential that on top of giving you haste, it just explodes your board position. It's wild how fast that card gets out of hand.
Yeah, this probably gets into broader macro discussions, but we see a lot of 3-ofs in this list. So, Riktus, how do you determine how many copies you want of each card in your deck?
Sure. So usually when I look at a deck, I look for engines, and those tend to be 4-ofs because you just have to see the engine cards, right? And we see that a lot with Profts. We're seeing that, of course, with FOMOs, and we're seeing that with Vivis on average. Vivi occasionally slips down depending on mirror match metagame, right? But the other cards, the removal spells, the role players, the number of those is going to be dictated heavily by what you expect to see. If you're playing 3 of a card, it's kind of like saying you want to see one every 20 cards, which is roughly once per game to twice per game in a deck like Vivi Cauldron, where you're drawing somewhere between 20 and 40 cards on an average game, right? So it's how many times do you need to see a card in order to facilitate the role you need in these matchups, and do they match up well against other decks as well? And that really gets into deep deck building, right? That's where we get into the theory crafting, where we're saying, all right, we need 3 into the Flood Maws because we're going to need to see, 2 of them against Control, but 1 of them against Red. We're only going to dig a little deep against Red. Against Control, we're going to dig almost the entire deck out, right? So it's a very nuanced question, to be blunt.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's one thing to really keep in mind as you're building your decks, is how many copies you want of each card.
Absolutely. But speaking of a deck that doesn't bother with that mostly, mono red. All right, so Bullet Time took down the 32-player MTGO Challenge this past Saturday with Mono Red, knocking off a stray Esper Pixies list in the finals while snagging that trophy. However, a brief point needs to be made addressing my analysis last week. So first and foremost, gang, last week you tuned in, I threw a lot of shade at the mana base. There were only 21 red sources. I said that wasn't enough. I made the mistake, gang. 21 red sources is good for a 92.9% success rate of seeing double red on turn 2, which is sufficient for Razorkin Needlehead. As Frank Karsten's math will indicate that anytime we cross that 90% threshold for success, we're in the clear. I want to say thank you to Arstal for commenting and letting us know. We're here to be accurate, help the competitive community, not placate our own egos. So I'm happy to let you know when I make a mistake, and right there, that was the mistake. To everyone watching, if you find nuances in this video worth mentioning, comment below. We'll be happy to feature you should your comment prove helpful to the community. Now, really quickly looking at the list, not a lot of major shifts here. This is a very baseline red deck when you bring it. Like, Stingerback Terror is the only tech here, gang. So just check Stingerback Terror, know that it's there for the mirror. You're playing it as the last card out of your hand, so it never drops to 5 toughness.
So one thing that has been consistent through all of Red's history is Screaming Nemesis, which is such a horror for other red-based decks to deal with. When you're playing the red mirror, how do you deal with Screaming Nemesis? How do you play around it properly?
Okay, so there's a couple different ways to deal with this. The first way is if you have an empty board, right? If it's empty board versus empty board, they drop a Nemesis and they swing, you kill it on sight. Abrades, lightning strikes, whatever it takes, it's got to go. Unless you believe you can race it, you have to kill it on impact into an empty board. Now, if you've got something on board and then they play the Nemesis and swing, you're probably just racing. You're saying, I will take 3 a turn, and we're down to like maybe 3 or 4 more turns for this game until it's done. And so all the Screaming Nemesis has done there is it's set a clock for everybody, right? That's typically how you're going to play it. But again, if you get one on an empty board, you don't want to 2-for-1 yourself is really the big thing. You don't want to end up in a scenario where you're like, okay, I've got a Hired Claw, you swing Nemesis, I'll abrade it, now you kill Hired Claw as well, now I have 2-for-1 to myself in the red mirror. honestly, card advantage doesn't seem like it matters too much, but when neither deck has any, those 2-for-1s add up really quickly and force one player to run hot as the sun, or else they're going to get buried under the card disadvantage.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think another big angle is when the Screaming Nemesis is sitting back blocking, it's also really hard to play against when you're trying to make that race happen. So it's an interesting dynamic to learn to play around that. So if you have any suggestions on how to play against Nemesis in the red mirror, or any tips and tricks that you have, comment down below. Let us know what you think.
Absolutely. But speaking of Red's favorite matchup, for the most part, let's talk about Dimir Tempo now.
Felipe Imar won a 63-player 5K premium RCQ in Brazil last Saturday with Dimir Tempo taking out Azorius Control in the finals, so let's dive in. I said last week that I loved having 2 copies of Lazav in Dimir, and it looks like it's here to stay. Great source of continuous graveyard hate while you're trying to pressure the Cauldron player, and it still just draws you cards with the clues each time. On the 3-drop slot, Preacher is starting to win out over Tidebinder in the main more consistently. This time we have a 3-1 split, we've seen 3-2 splits, but either way, people are loving Preacher more than Tidebinder in the current meta. And I think that has a lot to say with the fact that Preacher is good both on offense and defense, whereas Tidebinder is very much just a card that is playing the tempo game. In the sideboard, if we look over there, we see a copy of The End. This is an amazing card specifically for the mirror, but it is a very versatile card. In the mirror, though, if you get to exile all your opponent's copies of Curiosity or Kaido, it's a great way to guarantee you'll outgrind your opponent in a longer game.
Absolutely. Now, looking at that sideboard, Athena, there's no Vren, there's no LG Acolyte. You know, we're missing some of these staples that we've seen in the 4-drop slot. Do we need those, or do we care that they're missing, I guess?
So I do like the inclusion of Corsi Revenant in the place of these sorts of creatures that you'd usually bring into aggro. I think Revenant is pretty good in being able to help sustain your life, because not only is it a card that has lifelink on its own, plus it has that ever important death touch keyword we always talk about this season. You also get to do it again, right? So if your opponent spends an Abrade to kill it, or spends a Twin Maw, or I guess not Twin Maw, a Scorching Shot to kill it, it also gets to give the next creature lifelink and death touch as well, which I think is really important. So I actually don't mind the switch. I think both are pretty good. It just depends on where you think your opponent's removal is lining up.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and especially when you consider that Corsi favors the tempo plan a little bit better by being lower on the curve, and, you know, Vren, Elegy, they're competing, right, with Enduring Curiosity for slots, and how many 4-drops do you really want against aggro? I can see where we want to shift down a little bit and use them to replace Kaido, so that makes a lot of sense. But speaking of a deck that is ready to run right through red as well, Azorius Control.
Mateus de Carvalho made it to the finals of a 63-player 5K premium RCQ in Brazil last Saturday before losing to Dimir. Now let's take a stock of this list and stock up for the next season. We are done with the Horny Whale, which makes sense. It's great against red, but it's pretty lacking into mid-range strategies like Cauldron and Dimir. Instead, one thing we're seeing in here is 3 Elspeth Smite in the main board. This is a great card for the Dimir matchup, probably one of the best removal spells for the matchup, and it's still pretty decent into red until they land a Nemesis or a Lynx, and it's a good bit worse than a Cauldron, but you can surprise them a lot by catching them game 1 if they're just attacking with a Mako or an unbuffed Steam Core Scholar or FOMO. We're also seeing, speaking of that Cauldron matchup, 3 Rest in Peace in the board. So this list says, we don't want to have to play against multiple angles of attack from Cauldron. We're just going to take out the graveyard, and now you just have to beat me with Profts. So if you can't beat me with Profts, that's it.
I mean, I like that. It's a clever way to take out the angle that actually tends to accelerate the game out of your reach as a control player, right? Like that's a clever play. But looking at Horned Whale versus Elspeth Smite, that's really the question mark for me. Do we like this shift in your opinion?
I would say so. I think Smite in particular helps the matchup where you struggle the most, which is Dimir. I've always run Smites in my sideboard for the Dimir matchup, at least typically. And so I think if you're, I mean, we see this is an RCQ in Brazil, not an online tournament, right? So I'm imagining they're making this change knowing that their local meta is less Cauldron, more Dimir, more red.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because Cauldron, I mean, to be fair, Horned Whale, not amazing against Cauldron either. You really don't want to be on the back foot against that deck. It punishes that heavily. But trying to figure out which card that's supposed to be, Smite, Whale, yeah, Dimir would make that a much easier call when you get down to it. With that, let's go down to Tier 2. I'm going to kick things off and talk a little bit about Selesnya Aggro. Every once in a while, a single MTGO grinder wills an archetype onto the tier list through a long week of just smashing challenge after challenge, and Pre-Drag 123 did exactly that, grabbing both top 8s for this deck as they tuned it up. Last Saturday, they made it all the way to the finals of a 33-player MTGO challenge before losing to Cauldron right at the end. Let's dive into what happened here. So, there's no Collector's Cage engine. It's been abandoned. Instead, Gearhulk is back, baby. Full playset. I think part of this is that we have this fantastic toolbox sitting down here at 1 mana, and I think it's clever too, because you have Cosmogrand Zenith to really do a payoff for Bright Glass Gearhulk, where you're going to be able to get 2 cards to turn that on immediately, and other clever pieces they've put in this. They have Sentinel of the Nameless City, they have Duskrose Reliquary. You can grab Duskrose with Bright Glass, and it can sacrifice these map tokens so that it's just 1 mana, really decent removal. I mean, it hits Cauldron, it hits creatures, it's 1 mana, strong. And then sideboard, you get 3 Sheltered by Ghosts for mono red, so I'm just going to put it out there, folks. Like, this had to take out, I looked at what the top 8 was, it had to take out mono red in the top 8 and the semifinals to get to the finals. So it is clearly set up to beat the hell out of mono red.
Yeah, I mean, this deck we've seen kind of pop in and out of the tiers throughout the last year or so since the Gearhulk got printed. But it usually gets accompanied by Collector's Cage. Why do you think we abandoned Collector's Cage and we're just going full-on Gearhulk?
I think ultimately we needed a toolbox with answers, and we needed the problem with Cage is that individually it doesn't do much, and this is a very removal-heavy format by nature. You see these mono red decks, and they're playing between 10 and 16 removal spells in the main. You see Dimir, and it's playing no less than 10 removal spells in the main. Collector's Cage really only functions when you get a swarm strategy going, and that's very difficult to do if everybody's killing everything on site. You know what I mean? Like, if it's just on site with every creature you play, you want creatures that are generating more value. So it makes sense that they moved over to Gearhulk and said, we'll get a toolbox engine, we'll get a 3-for-1 against any removal, guaranteed, and possibly even higher if we land a Cosmogrand next turn, like turn 4 Gearhulk, turn 5 Cosmogrand, and then play one of the cards you got off of Gearhulk. Boom, now you're in the game, and all that removal didn't mean shit. So I think that's really why they've abandoned Cage, is because we're in a removal heavy format and we need the value train.
I think that makes sense. I think another part of it is one of the best things to usually cheat out with Cage was Overlord of the Mistmoors because of the 4 mana impending side, and that side looks a lot worse into red and into Cauldron. But speaking of decks that like to cheat out big things, we're going to move over to Simic Kona. Right. Peter H. Masters made it to the quarterfinals of Friday's 48-player MTGO challenge with Simic Kona, emphasizing that Omni combo is alive and well, despite the lack of Abuela's Awakening. Well, let's look closer. Exact same list as our Brewers Corners list from last week. I believe same pilot too, but I could be wrong on that. For those that missed it, the idea of this deck is to use Lost in the Maze on turn 3, and then play Kona on 4 with a planet in play. You keep your priority after Kona hits the battlefield, so you can tap it with a station land before your opponent can react. So now you have a hexproof Kona that's going to guarantee dropping something. It drops Omniscience, and then you loop Infinite Meringue River Regents, bouncing each other, which gives you infinite life with the one of Bloomvine Regent on the board. After that, you just amass a really large board presence, you bounce everything your opponent has, and you just wait with counters up. So the sideboard plan's really nice here because we have Sabsunin and Quantum Riddler, which are really good, like grindy Simic mid-range pieces to bring in after your opponent has some sort of interaction for this combo.
Makes sense. Now, I mean, Athena, I look at this, it's a clever deck. It's, you know, the latest Omni sneak and show vibe to it. Where does it struggle in the meta, in your opinion?
So if we look at where these types of decks tend to struggle, I'd say Dimir would be the biggest culprit. Dimir is just completely primed to beat a combo deck like this, right? You can hexproof the Kona as much as you want, but if it gets Tidebindered, it looks really, really bad. And on top of that, you need to have the Cavern of Souls for the Kona every time, and that's not always happening. And on top of that, I think the format's just really, really fast for a Simic deck that's removal is like bouncing things. As we talked about before, using things like Hornlock Whale already isn't good if you need to survive late game against Red and Cauldron. So just bouncing it to the hand instead of the top of the deck's got to be a lot worse. And it's just a little bit too slow with too little interaction to really do it in time consistently every single time against the aggro decks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a question of, do we get more pieces as the format develops? Because I think this is one you keep an eye on, right? Like, you look at Omniscience decks, and it's always, okay, let's find out if and when there are enough role players to break this card in half. And I think we're closer than we had initially thought. Lost in the Maze was a huge find. But that said, let's look at a deck that beats the hell out of aggro instead. Orzhov Pixies. MJ23 once more made it to the quarterfinals of Saturday's 156-player MTGO Showcase Challenge with Orzhov Pixies before falling short. And let's take a look. Overlord of the Baelmerk. It's entered the arena. You can kill the Cosmogrand, the Elegy Acolyte, the Elspeth if you want, but if you didn't exile those creatures, they're coming back for round 2 thanks to Overlord. I think this is a really clever build. The fact that Overlord does not target when it returns is especially important in a Cauldron Grave Hate meta. Post-board, they're following the clever plan of let's play the Star Cages once they board out the Abrades. Good call. The deck has more grind to it now. I think the grind is more graveyard-centric because of the Overlord, but this is still really, it's clever in the way that it's trying to grind because it's so well hedged for aggro, and then it's saying, okay, we've had issues closing the game, like we play our stuff and blow up their stuff, then they kill our stuff with scorching shots, now we're sitting here staring at each other, and then Overlord comes and goes, no, it's at least a 2-for-1, and if they don't have another scorching shot on site, we're going harder.
So historically, we've seen Orzhov Pixie pop up before back in the Cutter meta, and we had the same debate back then where the card advantage engine, people are kind of going back and forth between Baelmerk and Unholy Annex. So what formats or what metagames would you say that you would prefer Bael, and which ones would you prefer Annex?
So I like Annex anytime life total isn't going to be the focal point, right? But if you're playing Unholy Annex in the main of Orzhov Pixies, you're probably already kind of building it wrong, because at a certain point you just shift over to Esper Pixies and play with Kaidos instead. And, if you're trying to go into a control format, a control meta, I don't want Orzhov Pixies in the first place. I want Esper Pixies, because that was the main advantage that deck gained by adding blues. You get Kaido, you get counters, you get the ability to interact, right? But that's where you want Unholy Annex, is in longer, grindier games where you can take somewhere between 4 to 8 points of damage off of that thing, and it's worth it to you because you needed the Friction Arena effect more than you needed the life. Overlord plays a lot better in faster formats, but especially mid-rangey formats where it's going to be let's kill everything on site and we just need some recursion, which is where we're at right now, outside of Cauldron not necessarily killing so many things as it just bounces them. But if you've got a way through Cauldron, and this deck does, Orzhov Pixies can be tuned to deal with Cauldron. Rest in Peace is a very good card. I think we're going to start seeing 2 to 3 copies in a lot of sideboards, because shutting off that game plan for Cauldron is worth the slots at this point. You can't let it go. And you can't say, okay, we'll just kind of keep the graveyard under control, and then turn 6, they just pop off with an Agatha's FOMO, Vivi, gone. They're off to the races. They 16 mana in 1 turn, and all of a sudden you've been blown out in your position. So Rest in Peace is just there to make everybody play a fair game, and I think that's really where you're trying to go with Baelmerk too, which is unfortunate because those two don't interact well. So
that makes sense. I think also a big part of it is with Floodmaw being such a popular card, you can't exactly just turn off the life loss by making the 6/6 demon, because they'll just spend 1 mana to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. If we don't have supplementary demons in the deck to really emphasize the ability to play Annex without fear, then yeah, it's 5 mana to get blown out, and that's not good right now. But let's move things right along, round out our tier list entirely, and Athena, tell us a little bit about Boros Mice.
So Hamuda, one of my favorite MTGO grinders, managed to sneak Boros Mice onto our tier list one last time before we get a new set in the standard. Made it all the way to the quarterfinals of the 156-player MTGO Showcase Challenge last Saturday with Ratatouille 2.0 before the mice got trapped. Sheltered by Ghosts is a hell of a card in this format, and if you want a deck to abuse the hell out of it, this is the deck for you. This card is absolutely insane. It hits pretty much any permanent you would want it to hit, and a lot of the things in the format are going to be cheap removal that is still going to have to pay the ward costs, right? So it gets rid of the advantage of that cheap removal just as much. We're going down on the overall mouse count. Last time we saw this deck, it had somewhere near 19, 20, 21 mice, something around there. We're going down to 17, and we're prioritizing Screaming Nemesis once more, which makes sense. There's a bunch of red, there's a bunch of Cauldron. This card's really good into both of them. And we're seeing in the sideboard some very diverse sideboard pieces compared to the last time we saw this as well. We're seeing 4 exercises, but you're seeing 2 links and a rescue against Control. We're seeing a bunch of other cards going into various matchups, like Scorching Dragonfire into Dimir.
I mean, that's fair. I don't know. I look at this deck and it feels like it's just a half step shy of where it needs to be. So, I mean, Athena, does this deck gain anything from the old Spideyverse coming in?
There's 2 cards in particular that I think this deck might look at, and it's not guaranteed. And they're funnily enough, they're both actually spiders. One of them would be Spectacular Spider-Man. It's a 2-mana 3/2 flash creature that can save a board from a board wipe. The other one would be Spider-Punk, which turns off counter spells and things like Tashana's Tidebinder on red creatures, I believe. So those 2 can be potential sideboard pieces against Control, which historically Control beats these sort of red mouse decks, so it could be something to look out for.
Absolutely. Spectacular Spider-Man, I'm not going to lie, with Sunfall not being in the format anymore, that card is terrifying as an Azorius Control player. Just insta-speed, flash, doesn't matter, your Wrath doesn't count, and it's got legs, so you can just, god, no, that card's scary as a Control player. That said, let's move it along to favorite segment every week, Brewer's Corner. We'll kick things off with a little Boros Tokens. Alrighty, gang. So credit goes to the MTGA ladder. I, honest to God, cannot remember who I played that beat the crap out of me with this deck, but it was spicy, and so I rebuilt it from memory for the most part, and this is where we ended up. Welcome to a deck that really wanted to break Enduring Courage. I'm not saying this deck's tier 1, it's definitely not, but it's got interesting pieces that are worth examining as we kind of theory craft our way through Cauldron meta for the next month or so. What I like about this list, if you have Enduring Courage in play, these tokens off of Mobilize are insane. All of a sudden, Dalkaven Pack Beasts is pushing 9 damage. All of a sudden, Voice of Victory is pushing 7. Headliner's pushing 4. Like, you're seeing where this goes with Fountain Ports, with the Dalkavan encampments, with Elspeth even. All of these becoming 3/1s with haste is really difficult for your opponent to deal with. When I was playing against this deck, I was playing Control, and I was so confident. I'm like, it's Boros, we're fine. You know, like exactly like we were talking about with Humuda and Boros Mice, like, we're fine. And then Enduring Courage landed, and I go, oh shit. And then the second one landed, I go, oh, good game then. And that was the end of it. Like, it's wild how fast that card just wrecks a Control player that isn't ready for it. So, spicy number. Congrats to whomever I played on the ladder that highlighted this deck for me, because it's a spicy number.
It's always great to see decks like this. I like token-based aggro or mid-range strategies a lot more than the Caretaker's decks, and this just really scratches that itch. I actually did play a little bit of this, a list pretty similar to this after I watched that game with you, and yeah, I mean, this deck's really fun to play. Definitely give it a try.
Absolutely. But speaking of decks that are kind of fun, if you like Dimir and you kind of like Cauldron, Athena, tell us about Dimir Profts.
So this deck is a deck featured from the MTG Rebellion Discord. This one's by JG5399. It's Dimir Profts deck. So this deck is a great one to look at for brewing, and that's specifically why I wanted to bring this up. We're using a combination of powerful synergies like the Profts package we see in Cauldron, with powerful standalone cards like Beastbinder, Kaido, and Curiosity to hit from 2 different types of angles, one mid-range, one more synergy combo-based. We're shifting one of the tragic trajectories in the classic 3 tragic trajectory decks into a stab to let us fight more against the red decks while also being good against Scholars and Makos before they get any buffs on them. In a pinch, it's a combat trick, and when you have creatures this big, that sort of thing matters. I absolutely love the sideboard Corsi Revenants in a Profts deck. Genius inclusion for beating the aggro decks. To make a large creature, discard a Revenant, and then exiling it to give that creature lifelink, especially if it's a Scholar with Vigilance. A+. But I would like to see a couple other things here, right? Duelist of the Mind feels kind of weak without Profts on the board, and it's another dead card game 1 against Control. And things like Beastbinder, things like your removal spells are already there. So I'd love to see a flash threat like Drowner or a beater like Lazav, Nashi, or even Saboteur.
Duelist of the Mind just hasn't quite ever seen the light of day, really. Like, we keep trying it in different builds. We're like, this can work, right? Like, this should work. You know, you go back 10 years ago, this would have been a cracked card to get for blue. But the power creep is real. And, like, I haven't seen it really shine outside of, like you said, the very specific scenarios with Profts. So I'm with you. It's a little rough out there for Duelists lately. But with that, let's talk about some Angels. Alrighty, so this list, top 8 by Roman Maruniak at a 24-player EoE Store Championship in Ukraine, of all places. Apologies if I butchered your name, by the way. It's a fascinating list. I didn't realize we actually had this many Angels on curve in the format, but it turns out that Lightstall Inquisitor is an Angel Wizard, which I had not really put that together, that plays well with Giada. I hadn't put together that we, of course, have the latest version of Glorious Anthem that plays really well with these Angels. And again, this is a Sheltered by Ghost deck, so we're kind of doing the same thing, and white has Snakeskin Veil essentially now, except it can also give you life, and you can get the entire board indestructible against a Wrath if you have 5 mana. Let's look at Lyra for a moment. I remember you were talking about this at one point, Athena, that like Lyra, if they're not going to run Scorching Shots, if they're going to run the Twin Maws, is just cracked right now. And I think this is a deck that goes run the Scorching Shot if you want. We'll play Lyra anyway because we've got like Giada to pump it on impact. We've got ways to protect it with Sheltered by Ghost's Ward and Restoration Magic, and even freaking Parting Gust to just play protection with it. So we're hanging our hat on a 5/5 Baneslayer deck, and I love it. It's classic Magic. It's the old school vibe, you know?
One thing I really want to point out with this deck that I think is a really important synergy piece that is a lot stronger than people probably will give it credit for. Turn 1 Lightstall Inquisitor as a 2/1 Vigilance creature. Really, really good to follow that up with Lumen Class Frigate, because you get to swing with your 2/1 with Vigilance and then tap it to the Frigate, so you don't lose out on damage or the Anthem effect. You get the best of both worlds. And you want to look for any other time they print like a Vigilance 2/1 1-mana creature, that's what you're going to want to play with Frigate. But I think that synergy is really important to point out for people trying to brew with white decks.
No, that's fair. And I mean, I want Frigate to be friggin' awesome, so I'm all about it. But with that, yeah, that's my dad joke for this episode. Golgari Roots, let's break it down.
I deserved it after that, after the one at the start. It's fine. Alrighty, so this deck got top 16 from Cadet 11 at a 63-player 5K RCQ in Brazil. And you know me, Riktus. I love a good Roots deck. And we've always been trying to solve the problem of how do we play Roots without Tyvar? Without being able to give everything haste, how do we play Roots? We've seen a couple players try to do it here and there, but this deck's pretty cool. I think they're getting a couple of the really important pieces right. I think you should have only one Cauldron in the main. I think it's really good right now because we have the VV Cauldron deck in the meta. If it weren't for that deck, I probably wouldn't run it. There's not a whole lot of effects that you want to copy outside of your Insidious Fungus or your Mana Dorks, and a lot of the time the Mana Dorks just have that from the plant tokens anyway from Roots. One thing I do want to point out though is Corsi Revenant. I really like the Corsi Revenant in this list. It triggers the Insidious Roots when it exiles itself from the graveyard. It usually gets milled into that, so you don't have to worry about like killing it and then letting it get exiled by something. So it'll just let you get a nice life linker against the aggro decks of the format right now.
Absolutely. I think that's 3 decks now that you've looked at Corsi Revenant and been like, oh yeah, that's the spice. So, I
love Corsi Revenant.
I was going to say, like, that really tells the tale for this episode. Like, I'm just going to dedicate this one to Corsi Revenant. You did it. Mm-hmm. You impressed Athena, damn it. But with that, we're going to go ahead and make it on over to our Ahead of the Curve segment. So comment below and let us know which brew you think has the best shot once the Spider-Verse joins MTG World next week. And for Ahead of the Curve, Athena, we look at 12 archetypes in our recap. What are you playing? It's the final weekend of Edge of Eternity Standard.
It's Cauldron.
It's Cauldron? You're sure?
It's Cauldron.
No.
It's Cauldron. I've given up. I'm done. I'm done lying to you folks. I'm done lying to myself. Just play Cauldron. Just do it. This is my build. I've based it on some of the latest builds from yesterday or today as of recording. We're seeing 4 Quantum Riddlers. We're seeing 4 Flood Maws. We're seeing 4 VVs. these are the best blue cards in Standard, and honestly, some of the best blue cards ever printed, if I'm being real. A lot of these cards are pretty insane, both as tempo pieces and or value pieces. Quantum Riddler in and of itself, really hard to kill in a red-based removal format. 6 toughness is a huge deal, and I don't know if you've seen a Control player or a Cauldron player pop off with this card. We played in our Guild Mage tournament, and I played against G Funky, and I couldn't kill this Quantum Riddler that was sitting on the board, and it drew him like 15 cards through the course of the match by just sitting there and play all of his cards. On his draw step, he draws 2, plays one of the cards, plays something else that makes him draw a card, draws another 2. This card is so insane. You have to run 4 of it.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but Quantum Riddler is approaching an area that is rarefied air, right? Like it's got some Ancestral Recall vibes to it. I'm not saying it's that good, gang, don't freak out, but I am saying it's got those vibes, like it represents such a card advantage engine, and it can go at 2 and 5 mana like that. It's cracked in $40 for a reason, and I'll be frank, at some point may face a ban as well just for that. But I still have hope. I know. Athena's given up. She's fallen to the dark side. She's on Cauldron. But I have hope. Ladies and gentlemen, Artifactual Jeskai Synthesizer. Alrighty, gang. This is a weird one. You haven't probably seen it before. I only saw it because, again, I was playing around at the top level of Mythic and getting my ass kicked by this. And I was kind of curious. So I started, again, just reverse engineering what I'd seen, trying to figure out the slots. This is where we ended up. I've been very impressed with this. I've taken out Cauldron about 3 times with the list. It still needs some work. I definitely need to work on the tuning, but the sideboard guide is sitting in Coffee and Grinders for you, along with this deck list. I'm going to be updating that as I keep tuning this up. Fun things that this gets to do. First and foremost, you don't mind if Cryogen Relic goes under a Star Cage. You draw a card when that happens, and then when they blow it up with an Abrade, you draw another card. Fire Crystal's insane. Yes, we're running 8 red lands just for this card, because the ability to repurposing Bay and grab this when you have Synthesizer down is basically your combo kill. You go right through them. Finally, United Battlefront shines. In a deck that plays so much removal, and this does, if you count the removal, 4 Seam-Rip, 4 Saw Blades, 4 Snare, 2 Star Cage, 2 Net, 2 Aegis, that is a ton of removal. United Battlefront is giving you 2 removal spells off the top a majority of the time. It's a spicy number, gang. Test it out, play with it. If people aren't going to run hardcore dedicated mass artifact hate, not targeted, mass artifact hate like Ultima, this deck could really shine.
I think the thing that really impresses me about this deck as we keep going through with it, I remember this was a deck we kind of tried testing during the Cutter meta for the RCs in Hartford and Minneapolis, and we ended up scrapping it pretty quick at that point because you just couldn't beat an aggro deck to save your life. Your removal was all 3 mana, you're just way too slow. If you were on the play, you could do it, but whenever you were on the draw, you just basically lost. But Seam-Rip fixes a lot of those issues. Even though it's not an artifact itself, and we would have loved to see Portable Hole in that place, Seam-Rip is a pretty good card to still have in this deck, especially since you can also hit it with the Battlefront.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Seam-Rip, Cryogen Relic, and Pinnacle Starcage all came out of Edge of Eternities, and those were 3 massive upgrades. We're playing all 3 of those cards as 4-ofs in the 75 for a reason.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Well, folks, another week, another battlefield. Stick with us, and we'll keep you ahead of the curve with our 7th week of Edge of Eternities in the books. VV being in this format may have lasted an eternity, but unlike Wizards, we won't edge you any further with a pre-ban announcement.
Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please like and share to show support for your competitive community. Speaking of which, we have a fresh episode of Rebel Tea House this week discussing the looming Vivi ban in November, so make sure to check out Figured Base and Hermes' hot takes on our channel.
We appreciate having all of you here, and we'll see you in the next one. Until next time, Untap, Upkeep, Resist.